Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the FIA Group.
Welcome to Empowering Plans with the FIA Group. My name is Cindy Merrell, and I'm a senior recovery attorney. And I am so excited to be here today with someone I've known now for a very long time. Her name is Rebekah McGuire-Dye. She is the vice president of our customer success team. Hello, Rebekah.
Hello, Rebekah.
Welcome to the FIA Group. You've officially got in here on our podcast. We have a lot to say today. We are talking today about work comp in the COVID world. And I know there's a lot of late breaking things as far as each state has day by day, it seems like each governor's coming out with something new in the legislature and each state has something different. So it's lots to talk about.
Well, it is. And the burning question is, does workers' compensation cover COVID-19 illness and the medical treatment and the lost time from work? The answer to that is obviously not simple, right, Cindy?
Definitely not simple. I think what we might want to do is start real quick just to make sure our listeners understand why work comp might be a little different. Work comp, and I'm sure everybody listening knows, but what we are talking about is work comp was designed so employers could limit the amount of expenses they have if an employee is injured while on the job site. And it's all done through administration instead of going through the typical courts.
Yeah, most, if not all, states have a special court system for workers' compensation. So it naturally follows if you have a specialized court system, you have a specialized set of rules. That's what is making the following of COVID-19 and is it compensable under workers' compensation so interesting yet intricate because every state is different. And, this is not new. While COVID-19 and living in a pandemic world is new, dealing with workers' compensation and illnesses is not new. Cindy, can you want to tell us about the concept of presumption in workers' compensation?
Sure. So we have this regulation. Their finding is there's a presumption that if someone is working a certain job, that they are presumed to have been exposed to COVID-19 in the course and scope of their job duties. So in typical context, this is done, each state has their own regulations, but just in general, it seems that the prevailing groups are healthcare workers, frontline workers, and any police and fire response.
Right. What's so interesting about that is while those are obvious service industries, we know doctors and nurses, ambulance workers, all of our frontline heroes, they're clearly exposed to COVID every day. But in my home state of Kentucky, I've noticed that our governor has extended some of this protection, some of this presumption to restaurant workers. So it's all over the board. California, I believe, has also done that, while other states are very strict, just first responders. And while there is still a large portion of states that have not decided if COVID is going to be presumed work comp or not.
A lot of the issues happened when the governors were making executive orders in the midst of this emergency at the beginning. And what's happened is those emergency orders have since typically expired because even though we're in the middle of this ongoing emergency, the legislatures in various states are trying to catch up and essentially ratify what the governors in each state have come up with. I think what's interesting on this is there's some unsung heroes that seem to be out there and not have any kind of coverage through workers' compensation. So if they contract COVID, who is then responsible?
And that is a burning question for so many people right now. The COVID-19 positive test rates are still high. This is not an abnormal occurrence. So in order to really understand what benefits there are available, one has to go to state law to figure that out. So this is definitely a state law-based claim. But putting that part of the presumption aside, we have to look at who are the interested parties. It's pretty clear that an employee who's been unable to perform their job duties or frankly attend work in a shared workspace setting so as not to spread the pandemic anymore, it's kind of obvious there that workers with COVID are interested in what's going on the legislature with these issues. Who else might care about what's going on here?
Health plans. A lot of our clients want to know who has to pay for this care.
And that makes good sense because when all our clients, when all the health plans, employer groups, everybody out there issued their policies for the plan year 2021 and 2020, really 2020, 2019 even, nobody was contemplating a pandemic. Now, this is not a unique situation because I think it's you and I've discussed before. Prior to COVID, there were at least 19 different states who, remember, this is state law based, so every state has to do it. 19 different states had some form of presumptions for firefighters and some other first responders that if they had a certain set of illness or certain conditions, such as a heart attack, it was presumed to be workers' compensation. So that is establishing the basis for why plans would say, hey, we should presume that this is covered by workers' compensation. We should not have to pay, even though we don't have an exclusion in our plan. But there is a flip side to that, right, Cindy?
That's right. So if the plan doesn't have to pay, then they are left with the work comp claim. And then they have a claim with their insurance. And some work comp coverages are also self-funded and some aren't. So it depends. It could all be coming essentially from the same bucket, which ultimately the plan's going to have to pay either through the work comp plan or their health plan, or more likely than not, they might have an insured work comp plan. So it puts the insurance company at odds with the employer.
It's looking to see who is going to bear the risk for COVID-19 infections and spreading. It's as typical with any insurance, it is about risk spreading. Now, Cindy had mentioned that dependent on funding status would depend on who benefits from whom, accepting or being obligated with the risk to pay for COVID treatment benefits for lost wages. So if you are a self-funded employer who falls under ERISA preemption, and you are also self-funded for workers' compensation, a COVID claim is going to hit you on both fronts. It is your self-funding that pays not only for the health treatment from COVID, but also for the lost wages, for those type of incidental damages that are covered under the work comp statutes in particular states. So self-funded employers have an extremely vested interest in having the COVID condition not be presumed to be workers' compensation, because once it's presumed as workers' compensation, the self-funded employer is going to pay one way or another, and so long as they're self-funded for work comp. Now, there is a flip side to this, which is a commercial and true insurance plan that is not governed by the federal ERISA statutes. So the big commercial carriers, what do you think they're going to push for?
Well, they're definitely going to say that that is outside of the work comp because they don't want to be on the hook there. So that's going to put them at odds with their insureds, the employer groups.
And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of unions and what unions will do in bargaining for their members. So the COVID-19, this pandemic is not just a unique experience for all of us living in this time frame. It's unique for the carriers that are providing benefits to everyone across the country. What I will tell you in closing is to stay abreast of this situation. I strongly suggest following FIA on all of our social media channels, because as you could probably tell from the gusto in which Cindy and I embrace this topic, we do this all day long. We love it. We read about it. We hear about it. So we will be able to share immediately when laws do change on this. If you want to learn more about presumptions and want to know how that ever began in the work comp arena, look to the 9/11 horrific situation. That was the first mass documented situation that caused a presumption that, yes, this is workers' compensation related. There is no fight back on this.
We don't really know how this may play out in the future, but what we do know is that there is some rumblings out there that they take a model like the 9/11 fund that allows people, citizens, their workers, they don't know how that might be structured. However, to allow the government to bear the burden of these COVID-19 claims and transfer that burden from employers and plans and insurance carriers and workers onto the government into some kind of a fund. It's an interesting topic that I am waiting to find out more and see how that develops.
Well, and on that point, that does remind me that this is a topic for our next podcast. I'm not promising we're going to do one immediately because there needs to be a little bit more time pass. But you say that about we could transfer that risk to the federal government. I find it very fascinating. I wonder what will happen if the risk of the COVID work comp presumption is transferred to the federal government. The federal government has never mandated a vaccination. So if the federal government has to bear the risk of the COVID workers' compensation injuries, I think it'll be very interesting to watch. Is this going to be not just our first pandemic? Will this be our first government mandated vaccination?
I think you're onto something. Thank you again for your time, and I appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you again soon here on Empowering Plans with the FIA Group. Thank you.